السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. Alhamdulillah, today inshallah we're going to have another discussion with Dr. Habib, and our subject today is on the immune system, the immunity. And from the religious perspective, of course, we have the conflict that is the most epic conflict that has been in presence of this world since the beginning of humanity on this earth. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, come down to the earth, ba'dukum li ba'din adu. Some of you as enemies to the others. And so in that aspect also, this is a symbolic approach of looking at how the body's immune system functions, as well as how we can protect ourselves spiritually speaking against the evil eye, against the attacks of the shayateen, against the black magic and other things of that nature that is beyond our perception. So that being said, inshallah, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Habib. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Habib.
Alaikum assalam. It's good to be together again. It seems like every 2 weeks is not good enough. We need to do it more often.
Inshallah.
Very, very interesting, because I've been very excited about trying to bring in the mind, and without going off the subject matter, which, if people don't know, I'm a real doctor. And the reason I'm going to emphasize the fact that I'm an MD and a real doctor is because we're going to stray into the mind, which is very difficult to objectively analyze. However, indirectly, there are many parameters, not least ones that I have experienced myself. So there's one thing about reading and learning and studying. There's another thing when you can apply it to yourself and feel the difference. And Imam Shuaib, Sheikh Shuaib knows a little bit about what I'm talking about. But the fact is, the mind is a very, very powerful thing. And of course, the Sheikh will talk about many other external factors. I'm going to try to stay focused on the mind that you, or the state of mind that you have chosen to be in, or the state of mind that most people I see are in, and from a practical point of view. And I'm going to definitely talk about objective ways to monitor it, and studies actually now highlighting how the immune system, whether it be rheumatoid arthritis or gastrointestinal inflammation, these are all inflammatory conditions, which directly means that your immune system is attacking your body. And now we're seeing more and more connection between the immune system and the brain, and some of the interconnections. And actually the stomach will be in there. And of course, mind and state of mind and anxiety and worry affects the gut. That's what you feel. You feel that gut, but the gut is then connected to the immune system. So I'll elaborate on that. Sheikh, if you want to have a few words about that.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. So one of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, He says, Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min nafsin wahida. That, oh mankind, oh humanity, we created all of you from a single nafs. And that has a spiritual implication, where a person, whenever we experience, our social life, or relationship with our family members, co-workers, whatever it is from the other side of humanity, Islam forces us to look at them as we look at ourselves. And the Prophet ﷺ, he told us, you will not enter Jannah until you have Iman, and you will not have Iman until you love, hatta tahabbu. And so that being said, our scholars, they said that one of the fundamental spiritual realities is that all of humanity is actually the same life force, being expressed in different forms, in different ways, in different ethnicities, different cultures. But our root is the same, our father is the same, our mother is the same, and we're having a human experience. And so part of a Muslim heart, a Muslim consciousness, is that we look to each other as we see ourselves, and we recognize that there is this underlying unity that's binding us together, even though on the surface we may appear separate. And I'm going to give a medical example so we can relate to Dr. Habib, inshallah. People that have cancer, they have something that happens at a molecular level, that a trauma or something that starts to instruct the cells to create an oncogene. And this gene starts to say, okay, you know what? You cells, you all have this life cycle. You're going to live 3 days, 4 days, and then die. So I want you to live without consideration for the system. And then what happens also is that that cell starts to take more than its share. It starts to live the life, as they say in English, YOLO. You know, you only live once, so live it up. So it starts living it up, and then it starts to the other cells around it say, hey, look at me, I'm living the life. I got all the nutritions that I want. I got everything going for me. So why don't you be like me? And then the other cells, they join it and they say, you know what? Your way is the better way. Let's go. And so it starts to grow and grow and grow, and eventually it takes over an organ. It takes over an entire body part. But little does it know that this cell belongs to a system that is holistic, that is working together, that's integrated, that's working in harmony, and it's all part of this one being. But when it sees itself as separate and starts to look out for its own benefit at the cost and expense of the whole, then it becomes its own demise. And similarly, our scholars have said, you know, humanity, if you were to look at each other as one being, as one living entity, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala breathed life into you, so you love each other as you love yourself, that you care about each other as you care about yourself, then what happens is naturally you're going to experience the harmony that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. And all of the creation has this harmony, except in the realm of choice. So humanity and jinn kind, where they're given choice, we like to separate and divide and say, it's me against you. But when you look at the totality of the thing, everything has its own roles. The sun has its own motion. The moon has its own motion. Everything is in its own place, in its own orbit. And they have this pure existence where you can see that behind all of these multiplicity, there's oneness in effect. And so the idea is to be healthy, is to be whole. And to be whole is to come into a state of integration and come into a state of well-being, where you are well connected and well acquainted with every other aspect of what's going on inside you and outside of you. And there are sometimes these consciousness, these states of mind that comes in and separates you and divides you into little parts, and then says, you know what, you can essentially become a cancer within yourself, within your family, within the society. And so this is what we're trying to avoid. And the mentality that pushes for that is, of course, in the Islamic terminology, we call it shayateen, the devils, and all these different things, where he saw himself before he could see the totality of Allah's plan. So he said, I am better than him. You created me from fire, you created him from dirt. And so, just get us started, inshallah, in that direction.
You went straight for the jugular, because actually at the cell-to-cell level is where science is. But let me pull back, and just so that people can follow us, let me start off by saying the observation that I made many, many years ago, maybe 2 decades ago. I found that the people that were under stress kept on coming back for recurrent infections. In other words, the pattern was that there was a pattern where people under stress tend to pick up illnesses recurrently. And subsequently, when I started measuring antioxidant function, I found a commonality in people that came in with anxiety. That the people that came in with anxiety tend to measure low when it came to the antioxidant function. We know that people with high antioxidant functions have a stronger immunity. People with a low antioxidant function have a lower immunity. Now, antioxidants can be from what you consume, like fruits and vegetables. We also have mechanisms in our body that activate the antioxidant function, particularly when the body's under stress. So if you are fasting, that will trigger your antioxidant function. If you get into a hot sauna because of the stress of the sauna, you will activate the antioxidant function. If you go into a hyperbaric oxygen chamber, the initial oxygenation actually creates a superoxidation force, an pro-oxidant force, which then triggers an antioxidant function. So this antioxidant function is not merely a nutritional nomenclature. This is not a holistic and alternative. This is actually the reality of the immune system. And that's why I started the conversation by saying that I'm a real doctor, an MD. So don't forget it, because I'm going to tell you some real medical examples. So I gave you the simple example that people that are under stress seem to have recurrent infections. That's what I observed 20 years ago. Then I started measuring and I found low antioxidant function. And now what we find is that there's a communication. You said cell to cell. We'll get to the cell to cell. Let's start with organ to organ now. The brain and the gut. A lot of people know that. And it's been widely circulated in normal community conversations, but not in the medical world very much. You have to go to a shrink maybe, and he won't talk about the gut. You talk to a gastroenterologist and he's not going to talk about the brain. But a normal person has clear understanding that the state of the mind and the gut have something directly communicated. And that is a gut feeling. That is like, I have quivers in my stomach. That is, I feel nervous. You know, so when you have anxiety, you can feel it in your stomach, amongst other areas. And we will talk about the heart as well, by the way. So much to talk about. So the point is that on a objective parameter, how can we understand this brain and gut connection? We do that because there's something called EEC, enteroendocrine sensory system. What that means is that when the gut senses a signal, namely from when you've eaten something, it directly communicates to the brain. That's called afferent. It's receiving information. Based on that, it'll send a message down called efferent, and it will tell the gut what to do. So let me just jump a little bit so people realize it's a medical conversation. What they found is that the vagus nerve that starts from the brain, we call that the central vagus nerve, because you have the vagus nerve that comes out of the brain that supplies the heart, that goes through the diaphragm, controls breathing, that then gets connected to the spleen and then the gastrointestinal tract. So to keep things simple, what they found was that the communication from the brain to the spleen and the gut actually created inflammatory bowel disease. This is not theoretical, this is the study. And so they thought, well, if that's the case, what if we cut off the vagus nerve? What would happen? They found that the inflammation would go down. So in other words, they're seeing a direct communication between the information going to the brain, which we call the enteric endocrine system. The enteric means the gut. Endocrine means that it has some communication with the endocrine system and is sensing something. And so not only do we have that piece of science, I'm going to bring in another piece of science a little bit later about how the gut directly has an impact on inflammation, particularly rheumatoid arthritis. So I'll just stop there just to see if you have an angle, and then maybe I'll elaborate on this gut-brain axis and how it relates to inflammation and real diagnosis like rheumatoid arthritis.
Alhamdulillah. No, continue that.
Okay, so let's give you the other example. Recently, a study showed up in the Journal of Immunology. It was the Georgia University. So they observed that people that consumed baking soda actually had less inflammation in, let me just to make sure I get this right. I said rheumatoid arthritis. Let me get this back to front. When I talked about the brain and the gut, that was related to inflammatory bowel disease, like ulcerative colitis. When it came to the gut and how it impacted immune system, consuming baking soda actually lowered inflammation related to rheumatoid arthritis. So I differentiated that. I sort of mixed the two together for a second. And the mechanism that they found was that when you take baking soda, initially it's to neutralize the acid. So you may imagine that, oh, by neutralizing the acid, that's how the mechanism was. What they said was that when you neutralize the acid with the baking soda, which is alkaline, and your stomach acid is acidic, by neutralizing it, the stomach says, you know, I must produce more acid. That's what the researchers believe. By producing more acid, not less acid, more acid temporarily, it's communicating with mesenchymal cells in the spleen, which control cell differentiation, the types that we call CD4 counts, CD8 counts. So people with good health have more CD4 counts. It's cell differentiation, and CD8 count is the less, immunologically beneficial. So we can look at balances of the immune system. And what they found is that when you consume the baking soda, you actually reduce the pro-inflammatory signals. We call that the M1. M1 stands for macrophages. Macrophages is the type of immune cell. So here we are consuming baking soda. The acid went up in the stomach. It's sending a message to the cells that line the spleen, mesenchymal cells, which then activates macrophages, which are part of the immune cells, and down regulates one type of macrophage, which is called M1, because M1 is inflammatory, it's down regulating it. And on the other hand, it's upregulating M2 macrophages, which are anti-inflammatory. So they said, well, is this just a phenomena for people that have disease like rheumatoid arthritis? So the same medical school decided to test the medical students by making a group of them consume baking soda and another group not taking baking soda. And they reproduced the same downregulation of M1, which is the inflammatory pathway, and upregulation of M2, which is the anti-inflammatory pathway. So even in the non-diseased people, you could actually measure, of course, in the university, we're not measuring it here in the office, they're actually measuring the outcome on the immunological basis. And I bring up the stomach because, as we started by saying, when you have anxiety, when you have stress, it goes to the gut. We know that things that happen in the gut are sensed. Gut means the gastrointestinal tract, not necessarily the stomach, the small intestine, particularly the large intestine. That I gave you the first study to show that the vagus nerve communicates between the brain and the gut, either creating inflammatory bowel disease or being able to manipulate it can reduce inflammatory bowel disease. So there's the power of the brain and how it integrates with the gut. And this cross communication is then is directed at other organ systems, which are then told to go up or down. In fact, I wanted this conversation to be more about is right the opposite of wrong? Is high better than low? Is good vitamins better than other vitamins? And what I was trying to get at is that it's never about high and low, good and bad. It's about balance, which I think you'll be able to talk much better about. I think you were leading that way. And that's how the body works in an integrated manner between the multiple different organ systems, then finally down to the cellular level. And it's not about high and low. It's all about balance. These macrophages and M1, M2, they're not static. They don't stay high or stay low. They're constantly sensing the environment and adjusting to it. So, by manipulating your lifestyle, you can actually control the symphony, the harmony of your body.
Yeah, subhanAllah, subhanAllah. What's interesting is the ayah in the Quran, Allah talks about himself. He says, Huwa al-awwal wal-akhir wal-zahiru wal-batin. That he's the one, that he's the first without a beginning, he's the last without an end. And he's the openly manifest and the hidden secret. If you were to analyze it from linear thinking, you'd assume that these are all opposing qualities. Being a first is opposite to being last. Being openly manifest is opposite to being hidden and secret. But the reality is, from that perspective of unity, is that it's actually one and the same. He's the first and the last, and his firstness and the lastness is one and the same. So, but the way the attributes of Allah are known for us is whenever they appear in the creation. For example, you have mercy within human beings. This is an attribute of Allah, but He manifested in this world so we can recognize and know Him. Right? But when you see that, it appears in a spectrum. Sometimes you have extremely compassionate people, and sometimes you have extremely cruel people. And you could be somewhere in that spectrum where you're compassionate and merciful compared to some, but you might be actually cruel compared to others, and same with guidance and all these different names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when they do appear, they appear in a way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا عِندَنَا خَزَائِنُهُ, that there is absolutely nothing in existence except that we hold the treasure troves of it. So in every reality that Allah has created, before it appears, with Allah is an infinite treasure of it. So you can imagine, anything you put your finger on, any material, any kind of thing, before it comes into this limited world, Allah has an infinite treasure house filled with it. But then He says, وَمَا نُنَزِّلُهُ إِلَّا بِقَدَرٍ, but we do not send it down except in proper measure. So everything that has appeared in proper measure. What has been joined together has been joined with measure. What has been separated has been separated with proper measure. And when my teacher was teaching us about this idea of recognizing the unity of Allah and recognizing that all of humanity is actually one, in a sense that you should love them as you love yourself, and you should want for them what you want for yourself. And when we're thinking about this and we're reflecting on this, the idea of things having some separation was there for a reason. He started teaching us. He said, look, between when you take out a teeth from the upper molars, you find that there's a hole that goes into your nostrils. So when there's a hole there, they were separated. Your mouth and your nasal was separated for a reason. But when you poke a hole, you join the two, and there's great discomfort in it. So sometimes in the way the things appear, there's barriers and there's limitations that are there for a reason. But those limitations and barriers are there with proper measure, with proper balance. And as long as you maintain that balance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, even the sky, وَالسَّمَاءَ رَفَعَهَا وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانَ. We elevated the sky and we established the mizan. And mizan literally means the scales. When they balance the scales. And then he says, Allah tatghaw fil mizan. So don't transgress the scales. Don't mess up the balance. And so from the microcosm to the macrocosm, from the most minute, smallest things, we're looking at from molecular level to the cosmic realities, in the galaxies, and there's this intricate balance that's there, and now they're finding out there's actually mathematical correlations between the spiral of the galaxies and the way that our blood vessels they divide and split, and they're finding out that there's mathematical correlations that they follow certain laws and patterns that are there that keep reoccurring at every level of reality. You look at, for example, a flower. It has a Fibonacci pattern, right? A sunflower seed, the way the seeds are arranged, and you look at the way the trees, its branches come out, and the way the leaves they rotate. They all follow these mathematical patterns to show that the reality outside and within you are all expressions of the same thing. And there's this intricate balance in place that can be messed up very easily if you're not in the right state of mind and you don't appreciate that balance. And so going back to the level of the cellular things you're talking about, Doctor.
Well, you bring in the universe, so I'll just try to give an analogy, because you're listening to non-theological, you're listening to physicists, and I do the same thing, because I'm a believer that what happens in the cell actually is a reflection of the universe. And that was just my opinion. But what's happening is that this is what's being confirmed in many, many ways. So one of those is called the circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm is basically, in a nutshell, saying when it's dark, it's time to sleep. When it's light, it's time to wake up. There's a certain pattern, a universal pattern. And we've actually got studies to show that people that sleep at a certain time at night can have a lower blood pressure. Conversely, you can sleep the same number of hours that don't follow the circadian rhythm, and your blood pressure will go up. So this is a fact. And then physicists say there is actually a circadian rhythm for the universe. So I can't remember exactly what context they brought it in. So I think what you are saying about the explanations about the universe and what's going on at our own body level, at the cellular level, everything around us, the nature is following the same pattern, because it's the same creator, and hence why there is patterns to be observed in everything, like signs. The signs are there, but can we see those signs? Allah has given us many, many signs. And I find that with the kind of medicine I'm doing, which is, going beyond the traditional medicine to ask questions, why is this happening? Why can't we fix it? And I have some analogies about, high is good or low is good. And I'll tell you that these kind of definitions are actually stifling our ability to ask questions, which is then not allowing us to make progress in fixing the problem as opposed to merely controlling it. And so one of those would be, just as an analogy, that the people that assume that high cholesterol is bad for you and that low cholesterol is good for you. So let me change that mindset with just simple observations, outcome observations, I should say. So what we assume is that, well, if your cholesterol is high, the doctor's been telling me it's bad, so that's why they must give me a cholesterol-lowering pill. So let me give you an analogy. When you consume no fat, your blood will sense lower levels of cholesterol. your liver will then engage to produce more cholesterol into the blood circulation. Conversely, you could have a heavy fat diet. Your liver will sense the increased level of cholesterol in your bloodstream and will reduce the production of cholesterol from your liver. What I just said about the liver may sound new to some people, but the liver regulates fat metabolism, the liver regulates carbohydrate metabolism, the liver regulates antioxidant function, the liver detoxifies, the liver produces clotting factors. In fact, the liver does almost everything, because the brain is even more powerful in some ways. So that analogy to bring to a closure, to say, if you go in after a high fat diet, bear in mind your doctors tell you go in fasting. Okay, let's assume you go in fasting, but you had a very high fat diet the day before. Your blood sample may actually look like lower cholesterol levels because your liver will have not produced as much. Conversely, if you go, because a lot of people do this, they say, doctor, let me change my diet for a couple of weeks, then I'll come and do your test, hoping that their cholesterol will get better. In fact, if you consume less cholesterol in the build-up to your fasting blood work, you will seem to have higher cholesterol in your blood. So I hope that people follow that. If not, then maybe you can ask me a rhetorical question. Now, I'm going to give you a serious analogy with serious consequences, with an example that was in my office today. So when people have gastric problems, they assume they have more acid, which may be temporarily true. They assume that the gastric acid is burning their stomach, which is, let's say, it's been going on for some weeks, not just one day here and there, some weeks. And that's kind of when the patients usually see the doctor, is when they've suffered for a while. It's like, now it's not getting better, I better go see the doctor, which is fine. And the doctor puts them on an acid-lowering medication. So remember, high is bad, high acid is bad. The doctor just gave him a medicine to lower the acid, in fact, to stop the acid, not lower, stop the acid. That's good, right? That's bad. Because without the acid, the body cannot make nitric oxide. Nitric oxide opens up arteries, so blood pressure would be lower. So this particular lady that came to me with skin problems, actually, wanting glutathione, which is something that the liver produces and that has benefits for the liver and the skin. When I got to talking to her, she's on Prilosec. Actually, it's Nexium. Sorry, Nexium. Prilosec didn't work for her. She's on Nexium. She's been on it for 1 year. And I told her, well, temporarily you might see relief. But if you stop the medicine, did your problem go away? The answer is no. But in the meantime, as I explained to her that, without the acid, you can't make nitric oxide. So, your blood pressure may be up, but I don't see any blood pressure medication. I see diabetic medication, metformin, that's it. I see the Nexium, that's it. So later on, she tells me, yeah, the doctor actually told me I have borderline blood pressure. Well, you didn't tell me. It's not on your medication list. I just gave you a piece of fact, and lo and behold, you have a gastric problem, and now you're getting blood pressure problems, right? I mean, it could be also related to diabetes, but let me tell you, I'll go into that from a different angle. Again, nitric oxide. So here we are saying that high is bad, I'm going to lower your cholesterol. And high acid is bad, I'm going to lower your acid, without knowing the long-term consequences. Not only can you have more blood pressure if you constantly shut off the acid in your stomach, but without the acid, you cannot absorb minerals. So how many women complain of low iron? And how many women are on acid-lowering medication? I say acid-lowering medication, but that means shut down the acid. There is no acid. And so not only do they have low nitric oxide, which is an early predictor of developing high blood pressure, they cannot absorb minerals like iron, magnesium, zinc, chromium, and selenium, which have all downstream consequences. And thirdly, without the acid, you cannot protect from invading bacteria. So the acidity is to protect you against the microbes that you consume. So if you eat bad food and you get diarrhea, well, because some of those microbes got through the barrier. Now, if you consume any food, particularly raw food, there is bacteria, and the acid is designed to shut it off, to protect the rest of the gastric lining in protecting the ecosystem, which we describe as a diverse bacterial flora, which is good for your immunity. It goes back to immunities. So the example I'm trying to say is that the things that affect the stomach is more profound than people realize. Just shutting things off is not the long-term answer. And let me tell you something about cholesterol. If you live to be over 55, which I'm almost there, and you have high cholesterol and high LDL, you have better cognition, better memory, better brain function. You have lower incidence of cancer. Let me explain why. In your LDL, LDL stands for low density lipoprotein. They transport cholesterol. They're not the disease. LDL is not cholesterol. It's a transporter molecule for cholesterol. And it transports not only cholesterol, but fat-soluble vitamins. You've heard of those, A, D, E, and K. CoQ10, vitamin E is an antioxidant. So when you have higher LDL in your older age, assuming you don't die before then, right? If you die of a heart attack at 40, then there's no point talking about high LDL, you're dead. Now, that's kind of a joke. But so it's for people over 55. I thought it was over 65. I looked back at the notes, it's actually 55. People over 55, if you live that long and you have high LDL, you actually carry fat-soluble vitamins and antioxidants, which are good for the immune system. That's why there's probably less cancer. But that's an association. I can't say there's a direct cause. It's an association. Most of the things in medicine is association. Obesity doesn't cause cancer, it's an association. Obesity doesn't cause heart disease, it's an association. Obesity doesn't cause diabetes, it's an association. So just for people to understand, most of the things in medicines are associations. It's very difficult to find the cause. So the next association is that if you have high cholesterol and high LDL, you have better cognition, because vitamin E is a very powerful antioxidant that's fat soluble. And CoQ10 is a very fat soluble antioxidant, amongst other antioxidants, and these are good for the brain. Not least, your brain is made of cholesterol. So if you have low cholesterol, you won't have the building blocks for not only good memory, good nerve health, as well as good hormones. They're all made from cholesterol. And your cell membrane, every single cell membrane is made of a phospholipid structure, cholesterol. In fact, on the cell membranes, you carry receptors like insulin. They live and sit on lipid-rich rafts. That means that of the membrane, there are certain locations on the membrane that are lipid-rich, high in cholesterol, and that's where the insulin sits. So that's why it's important to understand healthy cholesterol is good for your brain, is good for your immunity, good for your cell membrane, it's good for your nervous system. Healthy means avocados, nuts and seeds, olive oil, raw olive oil, lots of olive oil. It has antioxidant properties now, they're finding. So good fats are in organic egg yolk, good fats are in wild shrimp, wild fish, good fats are in wild salmon and tuna and fatty fishes. I know about fishes, herring, you don't want to eat that. Mackerel, anchovies. So there's a lot of choices. Now, even your organic meat will have essential fats that are good for you. And even in landlocked countries like Afghanistan or Middle East, the animals feed off the plants. The plants are the ones that have the plant sterols, which are fat, and then the animal has that in their body, provided they're not farm raised under stress and eating toxins. So if they are wild and eating natural products, the nutrients in the plant will be in the animals. And when you eat the animal flesh, you actually get those. That's how an Eskimo can have a healthy cardiovascular system, even though diet is high in fat, because the seals are eating the fish and the big fish are eating the little fish. And the littlest fish are eating the plants. So it all starts from plants. For people who don't believe in plants, just a little plug there. So, just in summary, just wanted to say that the gut is central to everything, and high is not bad. It's understanding why the acid was high. And the main thing to understand, the take-home message is that, fix the problem, get the balance back in your life, go to sleep on time, you nourish your body. And we'll go into that a little bit because we want to give people actual actionable items towards the end of the day. About state of mind from your perspective, and I'll give you them some of the 5 pillars, shall we say, and one of them might be sleep, the other one might be something to do with what they put into their body. and what to eliminate, should we say. So the gut is very, very important. And I gave you the cholesterol analogy because, you know, most of the time it's been demonized, but it's in your diet, right? So if you're eating fried chicken, we're not talking about the same thing. If you're eating avocados and you're eating healthy, lean proteins, and plants have good fats in them, and seeds and nuts have lots of these monounsaturated fats, they're good for you. So in the final part of fat is the LDL is not the problem. The cholesterol is not the problem. The fat is not the problem. When you have oxidation on that cholesterol, on that fat, that's when you have problems. That may be a little bit, more complicated subject, but we can touch on it later on. And so it's not the high and the low, it's understanding the environment, the balance. And when you have oxidation, you don't have balance. Just to tell people what oxidation is an unstable state. Because oxidation happens if you have toxic metals in your body or in your environment, even chlorine, like chlorine water, bromide in bread to give you the bleach look. These will leach electrons. When you lose an electron, that's called oxidation. So yes, toxins like heavy metals will leach electrons. Chemicals in the food chain will leach electrons. So you don't have to look very hard to get oxidation. And excessive oxidation can happen even when you exercise too hard. So when you exercise normally, you get metabolism. That's oxidation. But excessive exercise will actually give you more heart attacks. Again, the association is marathon runners have more heart attacks. It's an association. And I, being a clinician, will say it's probably because of oxidation or inflammation from excessive exercise. And in the same way, they're creating oxidation, and other people don't consume enough antioxidants. So they're prone to oxidation because they don't have enough antioxidants. The antioxidants are in the fruits and vegetables. So there's one extreme, exercising too much. The other guy doesn't eat any fruits and vegetables, so he's under increased risk of oxidation. Those are the people that make their cholesterol risky. Those are the people that make the LDL risky. Don't blame the cholesterol. Don't blame the LDL. It's not about high and low. It's the environment, your choices.
Yeah.
I'll let you go.
Allahu Akbar. You know, what this reminding me of is in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about different civilizations, right? And the reason for their downfall, sometimes it's external, they get invaded by armies or something happens, and sometimes it's internal. You know, they have a political issue inside, and so when it comes to, for example, in Surah Al-Fil, it says, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashab al-fil. In this situation, an army is invading Mecca, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends these birds to protect them. So it's almost like, they have an external enemy coming, but there is mechanism in place to defend them and to safeguard. And then in the other ayah, right after that, you have Surah Al-Quraysh, where Allah talks about the prosperity of Quraysh, where they're given trade, and in the summer and in the winter, they're able to produce and cultivate for themselves a healthy life. And so and when it comes to destruction, even in Surah Al-Kahf, you have the example of the man who was bragging about his gardens. He says, "Ana aktharu minka malan wa azza nafara." Like he's telling his friend, I have more wealth than you, and I have more children than you. And his friend reminds him, he said, you're committing an act of shirk by associating all this success to yourself. You should say, MashaAllah, la quwwata illa billah. And then he says, it could be that Allah is going to bring a fire and your garden burns away. So this is an external factor. Or it could be Allah will cause the water to dry up, and all your fruits are gone. So similarly, when it comes to our spiritual health also, you have things that are internal and protection from that. We have Qul a'udhu bi rabbin nas, malikin nas, right? Because you have internal things that's happening inside your heart, inside your mind, that you have to be aware of. Some of those thoughts are not from you. Some of them are waswas and things the Prophet ﷺ told us. And then there is an external factor. Qul a'udhu bi rabbil falaq deals with that. Min sharri ma khalaq wa min sharri ghasiqin idha waqab. So, for example, evil eye. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-aynu haq," the evil eye is true. Also, like things that are related to people's jealousy and people's hatred towards you because of some blessings that you have, envy, things like this. And Rasulullah ﷺ told us these are things they can harm you. black magic is something you can't measure, something you can't see, but it can harm you. However, there's a tendency for some of our people to take every situation and attribute it to the unseen. And so somebody falls sick, they say, oh, it must be jinn. Somebody gets nervous chills or something, they say, oh, it must be black magic. Or they have a problem inside their house, they say, oh, it must be because of the evil eye. And so those things do exist. There's reasons. There's also, just like medical, we have a diagnosis based on certain symptoms. For example, somebody who is afflicted spiritually will have a recurring dream. If they've consumed sihr, or if it's on their skin, or if they walked on it, they'll see, for example, in their dream, a lot of the time they're eating. Or if the magic is in the grave, they'll see themselves as a dead person, or they'll see themselves in the grave. So they have a recurring dream of that nature. Sometimes they'll tie the magic on a tree or in a high place, and so they'll keep dreaming they're flying, or something of that nature. But that's not telling of exactly what happened unless it's combined with unexplained problems within the home. So, for example, between the marriage, because one of the symptoms of that, the Quran says, وَيَتَعْلَمُونَ مَا يُفَرِّقُونَ بِهِ بَيْنَ الْمَرْءِ وَزَوْجِهِ, that when they learned this magic, they learned how to separate between a husband and a wife. They learned how to break apart between a brother and a sister. So that it has an effect on the relationships. And sometimes they come out of nowhere. Somebody's warm and loving in one moment, the next day it's cold. There's no love between them. It's so there's the symptoms of sihr and things like this. And then another symptom is medical conditions that appear from a spiritual cause, and there's no cure for them. You can look for them all you want. You can try whatever you want, but they say there's no cure for this condition. We don't know why this happened. And sometimes if it's on the skin, they might appear as a psoriasis or something like that, or in the stomach becomes ulcers, and you can do any kind of treatment. It will not go away because the cause is not physical. It's actually coming from a spiritual place. And so, the recurring dreams, unexplained conflicts, uncurable illnesses that come from it. And lastly, there's blockages that appear. Because of this, a person will have blockages in their life. So they won't be able to, for example, somebody who's a good student, they're a straight A student, suddenly they find they can't do any studies. They can't focus on anything. And whatever test they take, they start failing. Or you have somebody who's trying to get married, but every time they go through, there's a patterned repetition of the same case happening again and again. They get to a certain point, and then there's a blockage. Somebody can't have children, so combined with all of these things, these are signs and symptoms of something spiritual, and it could be ayn or hasad or jinn or something like this. But what happens now, we have a lot of people, they have any kind of experience, any kind of illness, they'll say, oh, this is because of black magic or because of this. But Islam teaches us to take counsel from medical aspects as well as spiritual aspects. And of course, the cure spiritually is the Quran, the Ruqya, and all these things. But also Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he told us, take the medical cure, because Allah has placed the cure in it. And so to that means also another side of balancing things is recognizing the balance between the physical and the spiritual, recognizing the balance between psychological and spiritual. Sometimes you have people that have mental illnesses, right? They have a condition, maybe whether it's a schizophrenia or something else, and then they will see a person behaving strangely because of a mental condition, but they subject them to all kinds of spiritual treatments where that's not the issue at all. They need medical attention, they need psychological attention. So we have to know the balance, and we have to be wise in our approach. And that's why our deen teaches us, anyone who practices medicine in any capacity, whether it's physical, whether it's psychological, whether it's spiritual, they're termed hakim. Hakim is a wise man, somebody who's dealing with whatever is presented to them with a sense of wisdom. And and wisdom means to put things in its place and to approach things in the proper manner, in the proper way, and turn back over to you, Sheikh.
Oh, well, there's so much there, but I think my summary might be that you have symptoms not because Allah wanted you to suffer, but it's their warning, right? So when you have symptoms, it's a warning. And in the similar analogy, I would say that when you have either a symptom like acid reflux, the doctor should also ask in a different way why you have it. And I have two questions. So one might be very useful in that concept. So I'll repeat again. If an individual has symptoms, it's good for them to ask why, because it's a symptom to warn you, not to blame you because of spiritual, or to blame you. And sometimes it may be for you to turn to Allah for help. I know that's true for me, is that as a physician, we were taught never to depend on anybody else. And that was a very bad disservice for my religion. And only one person could learn that, that's myself, through trial and error and understanding from my own hardships, whether it's my physical or my lack of business success. I fail to understand that only is through Allah's will. And really, the difficulty was for me to ask for help. So now let's turn that to your symptoms. You should ask why, and look, did you do something to yourself? Did you not do something that you're supposed to do? So the question here that I have, I'm going to read it literally, then I'm going to try to interpret it. I have gastric infection for 15 years. That already tells me that it's not an infection, but I'll explain. If I stop the medication, it burns. But I also have all the symptoms that I mentioned, whatever I mentioned. I was babbling for 20 minutes, who knows what I said. So you can't have an infection 15 years. If you have a gastroenteritis, we're going to know about it. If you have ulcerative colitis, we're going to know about it. So what he's saying is that he's probably been diagnosed with something called H. pylori, which is an incidental finding, particularly for people who are born outside of the Western Hemisphere. That means 90%, and this is old information, 90% of that third world or outside the Western Hemisphere have H. pylori. It doesn't mean you have a disease. Now, if you live in the Western world, which is very sterile, and you happen to get the H. pylori, significant number of those people will have acid reflux problems. And many of them, if they do have significant gastric problems, that means Western people who never had exposure to H. pylori have found to be H. pylori positive. They tend to go on to get ulcers. Okay, so maybe 40 years ago, the doctors that discovered H. pylori were laughed out of town for 10 years. They even kind of lost their license because that was ridiculous in those times, that how can H. pylori cause peptic ulcer? You have peptic ulcer, you go get surgery. But from those doctors, and that's a really good story, how they infected themselves, then cured themselves, and then finally 10 years later, they find that H. pylori is the cause of severe ulceration. Most of the people with gastric problems do not have severe ulcerations. Just that information alone tells you H. pylori cannot be the cause of most of the people's gastric problems. You see what I just said? With lots of emotion, almost like anger. It's like, this is not right. You cannot have an infection 15 years. Your doctor has told you a lie. It's an incidental finding. And what he has is actually acid reflux. Not the acid reflux you may think, or the gastritis you may think. It's from inadequate quality acid in the stomach. Your pH in the stomach, the acidity in the stomach should be pH 1 and 2. Most people with acid problems, gastritis, have pH of 3 and 4. So it's acidic enough to cause problems, but not acidic enough to have good gastrointestinal function. In other words, they have invading bacteria. They have a bad bacterial flora, so they have more gastric bloating and more likelihood of inflammation in their gut. Whether it's diagnosed ulcerative colitis, it doesn't matter. They have more inflammation. They also have poor mucus lining, because without good microbes, you don't have the mucus lining protecting it, including the stomach, hence why you have gastric problems. So the second part of what he's saying is that when your body's used to shutting off the acid with these medications, the Prilosec, the Prevacid, the Nexium, and you stop it, you get what's called a rebound acid. Your body now makes excessive amounts of acid, and your body's not used to it. So the answer is to get healthy acid, and I'm going to give some clues towards that. We're not here to diagnose and treat people on this kind of platform, but I'm going to give some advice there. So number one, H. pylori isn't the answer. That's the bacteria that's in the stomach. 90% of around the world, they have it, except for the Western Hemisphere. But of the people, when the Western Hemisphere and some group of the people who do have H. pylori, only a small proportion end up with peptic ulcer. Peptic ulcer means erosion. That means the lining has been eroded. It's gone through the mucus lining. The mucus is a layer of mucus to protect you. It's gone beyond that, eroded it, and now started to erode the lining of the stomach, leading a crater, which is an ulcer. And that ulceration can be serious. And in the days when we didn't have these medications, you would perforate, make a hole through that, and then you'd need the emergency surgery. Half the people died because by the time you went to surgery. So there's so much to talk about just in this subject area. But the next continuation is that he has, or this individual has all the symptoms. Absolutely. You have bloating, you have gas, you have irritability, because you have an unhealthy gastrointestinal symptom. So instead of fighting the H. pylori, which you may treat it, I often say to people, okay, after the H. pylori was treated, did you feel better? No. Well, they treated me for the second time with a different combination. And I said, did you feel better? Maybe very, very small period. Well, that wasn't your problem. It's just an incidental finding. So the main thing to understand is that in order to have healthy acid in your stomach, you have to go to sleep on time, circadian rhythm. In order to have healthy acid in your stomach, so you got to stop eating processed food, because the processed food are stifling. They're bad for the gut microbial flora. Conversely, if you eat good foods with fiber, they are fuel for the bacteria. And when you give fuel to the bacteria, they grow in numbers, in diversity. Fuels like green bananas, which I'm not sure you love green bananas, but they have what they call resistant starch. Raw potato, you can get the powder form, is resistant starch. So because they don't get digested, they travel to the colon and the bacteria feed off them. In the same way, when you have vegetables that have fiber, you don't get any benefit except for the roughage and the bulking, but the bacteria feed off the fiber. Different types of fiber are different types of fuel for different types of microbes. There are more microbes than cells, more diversity. And when you feed the microbes, there's diversity, which is good for the immune system and lowers the inflammation. So number one, go to sleep on time. Number two, don't put processed food in. Number three, feed the microbes. Don't feed yourself, feed the microbes. And number four would be to supplement maybe digestive enzymes in your stomach, so you don't need the acid lowering medicine. With the digestive enzymes, you will process the food. They will travel down further. And those digestive enzymes usually come with betaine hydrochloride, which is a mild form of hydrochloric acid. And in fact, that helps the people with acid reflux. You may think acid makes it worse. It doesn't. Apple cider vinegar actually is acidic, but actually helps relieve gastric symptoms. So you increase the acidity and the digestive enzymes, you build up the good bacteria with probiotics, particularly spore-forming probiotics. You give yourself nutrients that help the microbes produce more mucus to protect the lining, and you use amino acids like glutamine to make the intestine, which is a long piece of smooth muscle, be more effective. So these are the things that the individual that complains of a gastric infection with lots of gastric medication, that they feel that they're dependent on the medication because they're in a vicious cycle. So the answer is build up the gut and then slowly wean down the medication. I don't know if somebody's trying to get in with the conversation. Maybe the second conversation of fibromyalgia and other things related to, we can talk about on the next conversation about immunity and autoimmune disease and rheumatological diseases, and how the brain, which is actually where fibromyalgia comes from, signaling these signals to the body, the muscles, where you feel pain, but it's actually coming from abnormal signals in the brain. And we know this from scans now. In the past, we thought people were crazy. In the past, we used to give antidepressants. Now we realize that, okay, it's not in the head, they're not crazy. It is an abnormality in the brain, and it's firing at an abnormal level. We don't know what to do, so we'll just give you Lyrica. We'll just give you Neurontin, which is not the solution, but that we'll talk about that for the next time. I think, and we made it clear that the brain and the gut is intertwined with the immune system. We gave examples of inflammatory bowel disease, rheumatoid arthritis, and that gastric is such a common problem, and yet it is the most common precursor to hypertension. And your gut is where you either will reduce inflammation or but it all starts with the brain. And we'll maybe summarize this a little bit on our next conversation, and then go into maybe other, bodily ailments, again, stemming from, what's going on in the gut.
Inshallah, inshallah. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us wisdom and to increase us in that. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to heal our bodies, our minds, our hearts, our souls, and to make us of those who are well upon the state of balance and harmony. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to recognize our place in the world and establish between us the connection of love and companionship. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to surround us with righteous company and to not let us die except in a state of Islam, and make our last words La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Jazakallah khair. Thank you for tuning in. Inshallah, we talk next time. Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.